So neither of these two trucks is actually mine. I own a version of both of these. My HBX 16889A Pro is very much modified, different wheels, and I've messed around inside it quite a bit. And my MJX 16208 is currently smashed in a box somewhere until I can be bothered to repair it, if I ever get round to it. So I've borrowed these so that we can talk about the original trucks and my comparison between the two. These are currently sold on a lot of websites and compete directly with each other. That's because this is the Pro version, so it has metal drive shafts and shit like that. There was an older version that didn't have that, but it's looking a little bit outdated these days. This is much more of a competitor for the MJX. So let me go through the various different points and things. Hopefully I'll cover something that isn't covered on other YouTube channels and shit like that. And I will point out that if you're after a driving video of somebody launching these into space and crashing them and shit, Derby RC, he has a much better video of that, so I'm not going to do any of that. This is just a chat about what I've noticed since I've owned them. So firstly, I'd like to just quickly mention the weight difference between these two, as it's often not mentioned by other channels. It affects other things that we'll talk about later in the video, and it's one of the first things I noticed when I took these out of the box and sort of held them up next to each other. This one weighs nearly 200 grams less than this one, without batteries fitted. So to put that into perspective, this one comes in at around about 869 grams thereabouts, whereas this one weighs 1,064 grams. The only difference between this and a completely stock standard one of these is it has had the differentials and gearbox greased up, which will add a few grams. But I thought I'll mention that first because, like I say, it does impact other stuff that we'll cover later in the video. And that brings me on to handling. Obviously that depends on who you are, where you are, how you drive and all that kind of stuff. But for me, this one takes it just by a slight margin. I found when I was driving the two, this one was slightly less prone to flipping over onto its roof, either through hard cornering or if I landed them really hard on all four wheels, this one was less prone to then flipping onto its roof. Only very slightly, but I did notice at the skate park I was having to right this one ever so slightly more often than this one. Body shells, and there's quite a difference between these two, obviously. This one has the posts and R-clips, the traditional style of mounting, whereas this one has the quick release lever on the top there and comes off in one piece. This is also available in a traditional posts and R-clips type mounting, but in my country it's much easier to get the one piece for some reason. Don't really know why. Quickly I'll just mention that this one does have skid plates if that's important to you. 2 on the roof, 1 on the back. That's not important to me at all. I break the bodies way before I need skid plates and stuff like that. They're always cracked and broken. I think some other people, depending on how they drive, tend to skid the car along on its roof quite a bit, and these really come into play for that, and this one doesn't have those at all. When I first got this, I really liked the quick release body, but I found that once I upgraded my battery to a bigger battery that didn't need changing very often at all, I went back to preferring this one. And the simple reason for that is I drive very hard, and when I crashed this on the front end, occasionally it would come adrift and I'd then have to unclip it and put it back in again. Whereas this one, it does shed R-clips, and occasionally you have to replace an R-clip every now and then, but it will run along with 3 R-clips and I won't care about that, whereas if the front end is completely off, I've got to go over and sort that out. So that's just personal preference. I would sway more towards this one out of the two. Oh, I should mention that with the quick release, you are locked in with that body. You've got to replace it with that same body type, whereas if you get this model or this model with the posts and R-clips, should the body break and be difficult to get hold of, you can get pretty much any body that will fit on there, drill the post holes in the right place, shove it on and crack on, which obviously wouldn't be possible with this style of system. Tyres, not much to say here. The MJX takes it for me. These I really hated. I found on a wet skate park they were sliding around all over the place. They're a harder compound compared to the MJX, and it really showed when I was driving around. These just grip better and handle better. So that one goes to the MJX. breakages, and not a very fair comparison, this one. I broke a lot more stuff on the MJX, but it was always running on 3S. This was always running on 2S. So when that hit stuff, it was often going a lot faster, jumping a lot higher, etc, etc. I also ran it more in winter, which means everything was slightly more brittle. On the HBX, I broke the front and rear bumper, and I snapped a bunch of these screws that go through the steering linkage. They're known for breaking those when you land on the corner. With the MJX, I broke the front and rear bumper the same. I also broke those same screws on it as well, but I also broke the suspension linkages. I think I broke 2 of those, and snapped a rear shock tower on it as well. So like I say, not a fair comparison between the two, but that's what happened when I was using them. Chassis and general running gear. Let's have a look inside them and see how they compare. So immediately you can see there's a hell of a difference between these two trucks when you've got them side by side. The MJX is just a much thicker, stronger construction throughout. The suspension arms are thicker and stronger. The bumpers are exactly the same design, but they're much thicker and stronger on the MJX. The shock absorber towers are thicker and stronger on the MJX. The chassis is wider, it has honeycomb reinforcement. The battery tray is much bigger. It does have this weird flap thing because the standard battery is an odd Lego brick type design, but myself and a lot of other people just throw this away, put their own battery in, and you can really increase the capacity quite quickly and easily. I had to wedge a bit of something in here just to stop it sliding forward, but that was pretty much it. The next thing you notice is that the receiver unit is separate from the ESC. The ESC has its own aluminium cooling fins, and the motor has aluminium cooling fins and a fan on top, although I killed my fan very quickly. But looking at it, the MJX is a much more sort of deluxe and robust design at the cost of weight. This is why it's heavier. When you actually get down to it and start looking at these things, it's obvious why it's so much heavier than the HBX. HBX, on the other hand, have made everything thinner, lighter, and generally more basic. The suspension arms are thinner and lighter, the bumpers are thinner and lighter. These body mounts are very flexible, and although my MJX doesn't have body mounts, the ones that do, these are much more rigid, but a lot sturdier. The chassis itself on the HBX is narrower overall, and it's made of much thinner material. It does flex a bit more. The battery tray is much smaller. I particularly didn't like this myself and ended up moving the servo over to this side, which you can see in my other video. However, other people have come up with a workaround by putting foam in here and laying a new battery right along the top over the foam and over the servo, and then strapping it in place, which seems to work just as well. The ESC is a cheaper, lighter combined unit that has the receiver unit built into that, and the motor doesn't have a cooling fan. Although this model has come with cooling fins, not all of them do. So those are the main differences inside them, and it's up to you which of those you prefer. I think out of the two, I'd probably go with the HBX just because it's harder to break and I've already sorted out my battery problems. But it's really down to you. I think you actually get more for your money with the MJX. Gears and differentials. This is well worth mentioning that both of these trucks are known for leaving the factory without enough grease being put around the gears or inside the differentials. So what a lot of people are doing to avoid premature wear and tear and failure is removing the sort of gearbox and differential covers and packing the whole thing full of grease, and while they're in there, taking the 4 screws out that hold the cap on the differential and packing the differential with grease as well. I've done that all of my trucks, and I've had nothing but ordinary wear and tear of the gears and things. The MJX is known for having an additional problem which comes up on the forums every now and then, which is shearing the top of the differential off. Now some people are saying that this is probably down to the 4 screws that hold that the differential together being made of inferior quality steel or something. Others are saying it's down to the owners landing the truck while it's under full throttle. So it's flying through the air, they're holding the throttle in, the wheels are going full speed, and then it hits the ground, and that's enough power and inertia and everything to shear the top off that differential because the truck can run 3S. The HBX doesn't do that. Like I say, it could be for a few different reasons. I've owned both of these trucks. That has not happened to me. Could be that I'm landing differently. Could be that those screws are made of different stuff. I honestly don't know. But I do know that replacements and upgrades for those are cheap and readily available. So it's really not the end of the world if you're unlucky and that does happen to you. And that brings me on to the last couple of points I want to make about these trucks before we wrap it up. The transmitter receiver units and the ESC. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, the ESC and receiver units on this truck are built into one thing. Now that's good and bad for different reasons. It's good because it keeps the weight down and it's a nice compact unit. It's bad because if one part of it fails you have to replace the whole thing, and it's also not rated to run 3S out of the box. Some people have said they can run it on 3S, just put a battery in and off you go. Other people have said there's a workaround where you turn the speed down on the controller and then it'll run 3S. But for me, if I'm putting 3S in, I want all of the 3S. So I want to be able to run it at 100% 3S speed, and on my truck, it just wouldn't do it at all. The MJX, on the other hand, has separate units, so separate receiver unit and a separate ESC. This is good, again, good and bad for different reasons. This ESC will run 3S at full power straight out of the box. No workarounds or anything needed. Plug it in and away you go, flat out. It also means that if either of these two fail, then you've only got to replace one. The other thing with this is it does increase the weight quite a bit. It's got an aluminium cooler on there, and with the separate units it does add a few grams. But the worst thing that I found, and the thing that I struggled with, which might be my problem, I might be more bothered about this than I should have been, was that it's got a fair bit of lag. So when I pull the throttle, there's a bit of a delay and then the truck goes. And when I press reverse, it's the same thing. And I had a real issue with that. It bothered me way more than it should. I wasn't sure if that was the receiver unit or the ESC, because I replaced the whole lot in one go and then it ran absolutely fine ever after. Some people don't care about this. Some say it's worth it to be able to run 3S and they don't care. For me and for a few other people it was a problem, and I did end up replacing them all, which was quite expensive and a bit disappointing, to be honest. But I don't want to detract from it too much, because like I say, that was a problem for me and it isn't a problem for a lot of people. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. I've certainly covered all the things I can think of off the top of my head. No doubt I've missed bits and bobs here and there. If I've missed anything big, put it in the comments below and I'll try to cover it in a future video. I did want to do a little bit about the transmitters, but quite honestly, it's late and I'm absolutely knackered, so I'll probably do that in a future video if anybody asks for it. I hope this has been of some help to somebody out there. If it has, put a comment below. Like and subscribe and do all that good stuff.